Thank you so much for coming to the second day of programming here at Axios House. My name is Allison Snyder. I'm one of the managing editors here, and it's really great to see everyone, and I want to thank everybody for coming out, everybody in the room here and in the overflow room next door. So thank you. And we have a really great and exciting lineup of speakers today to talk about AI and digital transformation. So if you're on social media, feel free to post anything you hear here, but please use the hashtag Axios Events. And we're going to get started. So come on up. Lila Ibrahim is joining me here, the Chief Operating Officer at Google DeepMind. Thanks for coming. I'm so excited to talk to Lila. I can't even tell you guys. Okay, so I want to, the subject is digital transformation. And we hear a lot about the transformative power of AI, but I think it feels, sometimes it feels, abstract or far off or even like irrelevant to a lot of people. So I'm curious from your standpoint, is there a way in which AI has already transformed your life or that you think in the near term you see it coming?
Thank you, and thank you all for joining us today. I've spent the past 30 years of my career at the intersection of technology and social impact. And I think AI is I've seen a lot of technology waves, and I think AI is not just a wave, but it's here. And we've also only just scratched the surface. Your question about how does it impact my life, actually, let me just dive right in. I'll actually put on my parent hat.
Go for it.
I'm a mom of twins. I have 13-year-old girls. And one is, I have my own A/B test at home. And one daughter is dyslexic, and the other excels at math and science. And one of the things that's been really interesting to me, especially of late, is how they're interacting with AI in a very personalized way. And they happen to be in a progressive school where they're really learning how to use the technology in a responsible way.
Right.
So right at the end of 2023, we released Gemini. It's our most powerful, most capable AI model. And it's multimodal from the start. That means text, image, video, code, audio. And what's really powerful about that is you can do things you couldn't do before, like take a picture of a complex math problem. And it reasons. You can say, explain this to me, or a video. We've done a partnership with YouTube Shorts, and the learning videos. So now you can watch the video and get a summary of it. You can be quizzed on what you learned. You can ask questions. And it's been really transformational. It doesn't replace what's in the classroom. It's augmenting it. And it's augmenting it in a way where, we're fortunate to be able to have access to a tutor.
Right.
But both daughters need very different types of support.
Right.
And to be able to make this type of technology more universally available, I think is quite extraordinary. And again, we're just starting. So the more that the AI gets grounded in factuality, also in reasoning, this is going to be really important.
You mentioned that you said 30 years you've been working in tech, is that what you said?
Yes.
When did you join DeepMind?
I joined almost 6 years ago. Actually, okay. I was interviewing in London at this time in 2018 going, why would I leave Silicon Valley for this rain and cold? But it's been quite an experience.
How has your thinking about AI changed?
Oh, I come from a technology background, but not from an AI background. And when I was interviewing, I did so reluctantly. One of my mentors actually introduced me to Davos, who is the founder and the CEO. And I thought, if I'm going to move my family all the way over to London, I'm going to see if this is really worth it or if I want to opt out. I spent 50 hours interviewing.
Oh my gosh, really?
I wanted to make sure it was the right place because I was excited about the opportunity. I do a lot in education, so that thought actually from the beginning was in my mind. But I was also worried about the risks. Like, what would it be like tucking my daughters in at night and they know what mommy worked on? Like, what kind of legacy was I leaving for them and their generation? At the time, we also didn't have, AlphaFold was kind of an idea that wasn't working. And today we have 200 million plus proteins widely available to the biology to biologists to scientists worldwide, they're doing things like food security, better understanding diseases, coming up with more effective vaccines. They're doing work around climate and the environment. So to take something that had been a 50-year-old problem in the science sector, solve it, and now have this tremendous progress, I think is quite exciting. It's been a journey.
So more optimistic, I take it, in terms of changing?
Yeah, more optimistic, and actually maybe more so this year than last.
Oh, why is that?
Last year, I don't know if, were many people here last year? Okay, so people were talking about AI, but you didn't really see it anywhere. And the government meetings I would have with policymakers were quite different at the start of the year, even at the year before, than they were at the end. So I think what we saw were a few things. We saw some advancements in the conversations that were happening. We had in the United States, we had the White House commitments, President Biden's executive order. In the United Kingdom, where I'm based, we had hosted the AI Safety Summit. And actually alongside that, we had a special event for civil society and academics and others to bring them into the conversation because not everyone could attend the Safety Summit. We saw work happening at the G7. And I think it's quite great, it's been pretty great advancement that actually people are collaborating and having the conversation. Now I think we need to move into how do we actually coordinate? But I think the fact that we're actually leaning into those conversations with a wide range of stakeholders is something, in past technology trends, when I think about them, it always came later. And so I think the fact that we're talking about risks, we're talking about opportunities, we're talking about collaboration, and getting some of those planning in place. So I'm pretty excited about this year of how can we continue the momentum.
So you mentioned AlphaFold, and sort of since the beginning of DeepMind, there's been a real effort and commitment to using AI to accelerate science, right? That's sort of the stated commitment. And you have AlphaFold, there's been some work around material science, and so there's ways in which it accelerates science, right? So scientists, maybe we're going to get there eventually, but are there ways in which you think AI might actually bring a different idea that a human might have never come to on its own?
Yes, I think this is actually quite an exciting area around science. You mentioned the material science that we introduced, Genome, which is a material science discovery. For those of you who haven't heard of this, last year our AI tool discovered 2.2 million new crystals for new material discovery. Of which we published a database of 380,000 that we think are the most stable, that can then be used to imagine things like new superconductors to power supercomputers or battery materials for electric vehicles. And this is actually a great example of something that maybe time would have sped up, but to completely, we call them the root node of knowledge. It completely takes you, it unlocks this completely different understanding of what's out there. Prior to, in the past, we also did some work around human intuition, working with some mathematicians who had an intuition but hadn't been able to prove anything. And yet, in partnership with the AI as a tool, they were able to do this. It really kind of comes to an underlying way in which we approach things, which is we have the AI expertise, but we really need to work with experts in their field to understand what are the most gnarly, challenging, complex problems. And maybe there's something that AI can unlock for us in the knowledge, but we'll only be able to do that if we have that kind of collaboration and think about how to do, how are we going to shift and transform these sectors in collaboration with them, with the leaders in that space, rather than having AI do something to them.
So digital transformation, there was a poll, I think Ipsos in August. People in the global north, incredibly pessimistic about AI. People in the global south, much more optimistic. Why do you think that is? We were talking about this earlier. Why do we think that is, from your perspective? And what's the challenge and or the opportunity there?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually I've done a lot of work in the developing countries, especially in developing economies when we were doing work around computing and bringing the internet into countries and communities where it had never been before. And at the time, it was like, oh, computers are going to take my job. And instead, it was like, oh, actually, well, wait a minute. The computer's not magic. The teacher is. Like, how do we actually think about the technology as a tool? And what I've seen now with AI is, in many ways, AI can help with the productivity and solve some of the problems, the efficiency. When you have a lot more challenges, and some of the government officials we've talked to, when you have challenges, you're more open to, you're not as biased or anchored on what the solutions may or may not be. And it's an opportunity to leap ahead in some of the solutions. And I think the challenge with that, though, is how do you bring the skills, the digital literacy, the technology literacy, and also access? With AlphaFold as an example, like having a wet lab and all the expensive equipment to do a 3D, predict a 3D structure of protein, a basic building block of life, you needed to have the space, the equipment, the expertise. And what we did when we launched it is we said, okay, well, how do we make sure that we're bringing along the folks that will need it the most? So we did some work with the Neglected Disease Institute to say, okay, let's make sure the database is accessible to you, that you know how to use it. And all of a sudden, they're making progress in this space that large corporations and pharma hadn't really invested in. So same with some work we're doing around AI literacy in Africa, where we actually have quite a few of our employees who said, like, how are we going to give back to the continent to make sure that we're enabling more diverse voices in the development of this technology and understanding of it. So we've seen a real appetite from many of the universities to actually lean into how are we going to build those AI skills and understanding within their emerging populations.
Right. One last question for you. Kids ask the best questions, so now I'm curious. When you mentioned you're tucking your kids in at night and what they think about AI. Have either of them ever asked you anything that was just so inquisitive or like just an interesting question about AI?
When I first took this job, I brought them into the office and I took them into our robotics lab. And I'm like, oh, isn't this cool? This robotic arm that is like learning how to stack these things. We didn't tell them how to stack it. We didn't tell them what to do. They're learning on their own. They can work 24/7, 7 days a week. And my daughter, the dyslexic one who thinks a little bit out of the box, said, Mom, is that fair? Why aren't they getting a break? And I think that actually, this was 6 years ago almost. And I think it's just really was interesting to me is just how young children see the technology. And the last one is my other daughter was recently, she told me that she was going to use some AI to help her generate some ideas, develop some ideas around her homework. And she was saying, is it okay? I promise I'm going to highlight this as one of my sources. So again, just thinking about how we're teaching responsibility. It's like not just the technology as a tool, but how do you think about the responsible development and use of the technology? And candidly, I think teaching teenagers it's one thing that's going to be easier to teach them than it is my generation.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And
thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Up next is our publisher, Nick Johnson.
Thank you, Allison. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. This is a packed house, standing room only. We are in the thick of it here at Axios House, a full week of events. Grab me afterwards. Check us out online if you want to know what else is coming up. And, of course, a huge thanks to our partners for making this entire week possible, and a huge double extra thanks to Qualcomm. This is their second year being a massive partner for us. Axios House would not exist without the support of Qualcomm, so I'm very excited to welcome back a repeat guest to the Axios House stage, Qualcomm's Chief Marketing Officer, Don McGuire. Don, welcome back. Great to see you in Davos again.
Hi, everybody. I think we're going to puddle here by the time we're done. With the melting,
risk of being in Davos.
The melting snow of our shoes.
So this is our second year talking digital transformation. It was the same topic last year here in Davos. And I feel like there was a lot on our minds there in a very big picture. We've had almost, a year to digest AI. And so I think now is a great opportunity to begin to narrow in on this. And let's take your focus on that. Like, tell us a little bit about how you're thinking about AI and specifically on-device AI and what that really means.
Sure. I'm in a unique position in that I work for a company that's been researching, deploying, commercializing AI for 15 years.
Welcome with the rest of us to the
Right.
conversation. Now, finally, right? Where have we been?
And then ChatGPT became the press release, right, for AI, thrusted it with Gen AI into the forefront. But I'm also a CMO of a large enterprise who's got to think about how are we going to deploy these tools and what are the concerns and what are the benefits. So there's two sides to the coin from that perspective. We can get to on-device AI in a second because that's really a technology conversation. Gen AI right now is, we're just at the beginning, as Lila said. There's so much to be unlocked, to be learned, to be explored. And in order for it to scale, the tool sets and the workloads are going to have to be distributed across things like the cloud, on-premise, right, whether it's a campus, a home network, right, or an enterprise private network, and then on-device. Because depending on what you're trying to do and how you're trying to use a tool, there are benefits with having AI just run on your device and not go anywhere else. And as long as the performance is there, the AI performance, the computing performance is there, and it can handle the model, whether it's a large language model or whatever, personalization, privacy, security can be a benefit of just running that AI tool on device. So you don't have to worry about it going somewhere else, and whatever you're developing by using that tool being grabbed and then some other model being trained on it, which I know is a concern of large language models in general.
Yeah.
Right?
The data security thing is interesting. Let's come back to that in 1 second. But I do want to put a point on, I think what you mentioned is that there's a lot of us who are kind of new to this, like, oh, all of a sudden AI is here. And your view was like, come on, guys. We've been on this for 15 years. Give us a sense of kind of that arc and how that informs how you approach it now with that kind of experience, that backing.
Yeah, I mean, AI's been running in the background, so to speak, right? Making your photos better on your smartphones or doing things that you may not even realize were AI driven. And so I think with the advent of Gen AI and sort of the proactiveness of it, or now the prompting of it, it's sort of a new thing that people now are using that is something that is more proactive than running in the background.
In the forefront now instead of what was running all these things.
Exactly, and it's something you're prompting in and getting a response out. It wasn't just automatically kind of happening as you're moving through your digital life, so to speak. So that was the big shift, I think, for both for individual users, but also as we're starting to deploy these tools more in an enterprise environment. Right, and so it's been interesting. Again, technology from a scale perspective, the technology has to normalize across the cloud and the edge and on device in order for AI to, and especially Gen AI, to really scale and be super useful to people. And then I think the second point is that Gen AI or AI in general has to become less prompted and reactive and more anticipatory and suggestive. So I think the true value of AI can be unlocked when it's making recommendations. When you have allowed it to learn enough about you, because you're still in control. Remember, you're still in control, and so keep control. But at least for now. So take that control. But as you let it learn things about you, it can be truly helpful if it can make suggestions, if it can help you with recommendations, versus prompt in, response out, prompt in, response out. Right. That's novel, but then it gets old. But as you're moving through your life, right, if you're going through a day, whether it's a personal day and you're just trying to plan a day trip with your friend around town, and to have an AI assistant, a true AI assistant, along with you, helping to make recommendations, restaurants, places you should go see, based on the conversation that you're having with your friend, or based on where you've been within the past, and the photos you've taken, and things like that, because you've allowed access to it. True AI assistance is, I think, dare say, nirvana of usefulness at the individual level for AI, and even in the enterprise level with Copilot and things like that, right? The true Copilot helping you along the way.
We literally talked about this last year, just on the cusp of that, where you were talking about cool ways where your car would recognize like who was driving and how to react. The way you talk about it now is a lot more ambitious. It's a lot cooler, innovative, intuitive, I think, AI functionality.
It's moving so fast, but we've, in this short year, we've learned a lot. And some of the things that even Lila mentioned, 2 years ago, 24 months ago, we wouldn't have thought these things were possible.
We wouldn't be having this conversation.
We wouldn't have been having these conversations.
Right.
It's so real time, which brings back to the conversation of responsibility and how do we keep control as the technology evolves and as we continue to move into the future? Because I know there's a fear factor. There's always fear with any new technology, right? People are afraid naturally. It's a natural behavior. But how do we put that fear aside, right? And then so that we can move forward.
Well, let's stick with the fear just a little bit. A big concern about AI is driven by data, our
Sure.
data. How do you think about keeping control of that, keeping track of that as it's hoovered up by all these generative AI models?
Well, I think the deployment of the tools and then how the tools are used, the governance around them, the responsibility. If we could take, dare I say, social media, but if we could learn lessons from social media and how ungoverned it had been for so long, we might be able to avoid some of the negative effects, right, that we are seeing on social media platforms that we could maybe avoid when AI gets to scale and is deployed, in mass. I don't necessarily think overregulation is the answer. It tends to slow down innovation and not really solve any problems. AI is moving too fast. By the time you try to regulate it, it's already moved on. But governance is something that can actually be responsibility of everybody in the ecosystem, right, to be responsible.
Yeah. Well, let's dig in on that. The thing I love about Davos is when you convene these kinds of conversations, everyone in the room really cares about these topics, and they're either in charge of these topics or think they're in charge of these topics. So what is the advice you would give to them when they go back to the regulatory agencies, their home countries, their home companies, as a way to think about not making the same mistakes made in social media?
I think the most important thing is if we cannot let this, like everything else in the world, become polarized, that would be fantastic. That'd be an amazing step one, because I'm already seeing the polarization, right? There's the fear over here, and there's a whole narrative around that, and then there's the over-optimism. It's going to,
The poll Allison just mentioned,
right.
Whether people view it optimistically or negatively.
Exactly. I think the conversation is really important. Acknowledge the fear, recognize the fear, talk through the fear, right? And then logically and pragmatically talk about the evolution and the benefits that these tools and the technology will bring to the world from a societal level, right, to a business level, to a personal level.
All right, so before we wrap up here, let's end on one AI thing since we're talking about it. Are there any examples you can give from your experience at Qualcomm, even on your
Sure.
teams, like how you're using generative AI, things blowing your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've done a good job. I think I heard a stat earlier today in a panel that I was involved in where 80% of enterprises don't know how to bring these tools in and deploy them within their enterprise environment. I think maybe we're part of the 20%. We took a Hive approach to bringing tools in where we put a steering committee together. Everybody's represented, legal, IT, marketing, anybody who wants to see at the table. We vet the tools. Of course, legal is concerned about how are these tools trained? What are the algorithms?
Right.
Who's going to sue us? Right? And then we've got IT. Are we going to be hacked? So everybody's got their hot buttons. So we get all those out on the table and we vet the tool. And then once the tool checks all the boxes and gets through that spanky machine, then we deploy. So from a marketing perspective, I've deployed 3 tools to date.
In the past year?
In the past year, I'm a beta customer of Firefly. Firefly is an amazing tool that will change the way creators create. It will enhance. The trajectory of content development and publishing will be forever transformed. Things that used to take 2 days to do, for example, just with video editing, are taking 5 seconds now with the deployment of Firefly.
It's an incredible change, right?
It's incredible change. I went to Adobe Max and mind blown, right? So it was amazing. So we're deploying Firefly. Writer, an amazing tool if you haven't used Writer, for copy development. Product naming, which if any other CMOs in the audience, is the bane of my existence. Product naming is so hard.
So long to name Axios.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Miserable.
Is the name taken? Is it a word? Is it not a word? Is it available? Can you trademark it in 75,000 countries? Oh no, someone owns it in Zimbabwe. Go back to the drawing board. That was a month after month after long. Legal's trying to do a knockout search. Writer has taken that process of months and months of development for naming down to weeks. So it's been an amazing tool. My team uses Writer every day. across various copy development functions. And then we're experimenting with things like Midjourney. We've deployed chatbots within Qualcomm as an organization. We're using Teams Chat through Copilot, and we're also using ChatWise, which is an internal tool. They're trained differently. So ChatWise is only trained on Qualcomm data. So if you're using it just for as a ChatGPT-like function, you're only going to get an answer and response based on the data that we've put into it. Teams Chat will bring data in from external sources. So depending on what you're trying to do, we have 2 different chatbots, and then we're using GitHub for code development as well as an internal code development tool as well.
That's an incredible list. Just in the past year since we last talked.
Just in the past
numbers
year.
of things.
Yeah.
Hope to welcome you back in another year at Axios House. Thanks, Don, for being here, and thanks, Qualcomm, for being such a great partner. Stick around, everybody. We've got our Chief Technology Officer, Ina Fried, coming up next for our final conversation.
Thanks a lot, everyone.
Thanks, Nick. Hi, everyone. It's great to be back here in Axios House. It's great to be back in Davos. Last year, AI was the talk of Davos. Everyone had found ChatGPT. This year, AI is the talk of Davos, but I think it's a really different conversation. And I want to dive into that with our next guest, who is Eric Brynjolfsson, who is from Stanford, amazing, is looking at how this is changing businesses. So, Eric, please welcome. So Eric, as I said, like people were talking about AI last year too, and the same technology, it's a really different conversation. What was the conversation like last year, and what is it about this year?
So last year, ChatGPT had
Easy
just
for
come
you to
out.
say.
Yeah, easy for me to say. And it just like got the awareness of everybody. It was an overnight success, although like most overnight successes, it was really decades in the making. And technologists have been working in deep learning and other technologies under the hood. But this was really a quantum improvement in capabilities and especially in awareness. And with there's been so much buzz about the technological capabilities. But now what I'm seeing is this is really the year of harvesting that and taking, where AI gets a body, not just a brain. And we're able to take that into action where it actually changes the way people work and live. And particularly, I'm an economist thinking about the productivity implications. I'm actually very bullish about some of the possibilities for significantly improving productivity much faster than we might have thought.
So, I mean, put another way, my sense is last year, all the CEOs were talking about ChatGPT, but it was mainly like, oh, wow, this is as good at writing a speech with buzzwords as I am. This year, it seems like everyone's like, I got to transform my business. And, we just had Don McGuire up here, and he was listing all the different ways that they've deeply integrated generative AI into their business. My sense is that's not where, they're a tech company. My sense is that's not where most businesses are at.
No, he's certainly ahead of the curve. It was a great list he came up with. But every CEO, every board is asking every CEO, what is our game plan for generative AI? What are the tasks that we can do differently? And it turns out that there's a huge set of tasks. Starting at MIT and Stanford for the academic work, and now in my company, Work Helix, we've created a taxonomy. There's usually 18,000 tasks. You can take every occupation and break it down into individual tasks, like what does a radiologist do, what does a nurse do, what does an economist do. And there was a taxonomy that the Bureau of Labor Statistics put together of 18,000 tasks. Is very useful. We've now made that even more fine-grained down to a little over 200,000 tasks by doing NLP on job listings and job postings and resumes. So we have a sense of what occupations do. If you go through all of those tasks, somewhere between 40 and 50% of them can be significantly transformed by just generative AI, let alone the other types, flavors of AI. And when I say transformed, it doesn't mean automated necessarily. In fact, most cases, it's augmented. You can do something differently and better. But that's just a huge chunk of the US GDP or any country's GDP that is going to be affected. And the amazing thing is how quickly some of those tasks are already being changed.
And I was talking yesterday, Accenture is doing this boot camp for executives where they're kind of walking through all the things you need to do to be able to get to do that automation. My sense is it's not something you can flip a switch, that there are things you need to do as a company, both on the technology side in terms of is your data in the cloud, right. Do you have it in a way that an AI system can understand, although they're much better with unstructured data than they used to be. And then on the people side, that you really have to understand, as you said, the tasks that people are doing in a different way than most companies do. Are most companies ready to harness the benefits, and what sort of work do they need to be doing?
Well, yes and no. So almost any big, powerful technology that transforms a lot of the economy, economists call them general purpose technologies. We used to use the acronym GPTs, but
I
that
think
got
that's
stolen
taken
from us. Yeah. But general purpose technology, you go back to the steam engine or electricity or even computers, exactly what you're saying, they would typically take years, if not decades, for the business processes to be changed. With electricity, it was about 30 years before you saw big productivity improvements. It's remarkable when you look through the record. And that doesn't mean that electricity was a fad and overhyped. I mean, it was pretty cool technology. It's just that it takes a while to make those changes. The reason I said yes and no is that while I do think a lot of those changes will increase the productivity of these tools, what is a little different about this technology is that in many cases, there are things you can do quite quickly. Everyone in this room, I know, has used ChatGPT and Midjourney, some of those other tools. You didn't need to learn a new language. You didn't have to go to school for 4 years to learn the techniques. And to install it, you didn't have to like build a new factory or buy new pieces of machinery. You got it off the web. So a lot of the infrastructure, both the human capital and the physical capital, is in place for some of these tools. And that's kind of fun playing with those tools. But if you look at companies that are implementing them, we studied a call center, and within about 3 to 4 months, they were getting significant double-digit productivity gains from their same call center operators using many of the same business processes. Now, ultimately, I think the gains will be even bigger once you do a more radical transformation. But I don't think this is one of those things where it's going to be years before we start seeing payoff.
And I think a lot of folks are wanting to do the big strategy, but they're also wanting to know, what is the low-hanging fruit? What can I do today? I mean, one thing that I've heard is if you have data in a company that's already building the AI tools, whether it's Salesforce or Microsoft 365, that's one way. And what are your recommendations to companies when they're like, I do want to transform my business and I want to harness this today?
Yeah. So you need to have a game plan, like I said, and stepping stones. Like, don't try to boil the ocean right off the bat, even if there are literally 80 to 100,000 tasks that generative AI could help with out of that 200,000 task taxonomy, many of them in your organization. I mean, you don't want to like try and do them all and transform 50% of your company all at once. You can get some low-hanging fruit. So there's certain areas that we just, almost every company has these. There's call centers and customer service. There's sales, coding. Most companies have some coding. Actually, a lot of sort of basic administrative management tasks all fall in this category. And there are tools for each of those. If you do this task analysis, this task-based analysis, you can prioritize them. And let's just take the call center example, which is one that I studied in great depth in a rollout. It was, for me, an economist's dream because they rolled it out in a phased way. So some people got access to the technology and some people didn't. So it was like a controlled experiment, like an A/B test. And you could get causal estimates of how much of a difference did it make for this tool. And the call center operators were not replaced with the tool. They were augmented with it. And as I said, they got about, well, the average person got about a 14% improvement within like 2 to 3 months. The least skilled workers, the least experienced workers, got about a 35% improvement. So actually, unlike some earlier technologies, this one seems to disproportionately help the less skilled workers. Customer satisfaction went up. If you look at net promoter scores, customer sentiment went up. We looked at millions of transcripts, how many happy words and how many angry words were in there. A lot more happy words, fewer angry words. And maybe not coincidentally, the reps themselves were happier. I guess it's more fun if your customers aren't yelling at you. And so they also had less turnover. So all these KPIs were improving in lockstep. Stockholders, customers, employees. It wasn't trading off one versus the other. It was a win for all of them.
And I know you've talked about this in the past. When we've talked before, you've said it's about automating tasks and changing, replacing
automating
tasks.
And augmenting. Yeah.
Yeah, automating and augmenting tasks, not replacing jobs. But if your call center workers are 14% more productive, is it really reasonable to think that they're not going to reduce their call center employment by 14%?
Definitely not by 14%. For call centers, I think there may be some reductions. Depending on the category, you're going to actually have growth. And let me give you a little economics here. So, you can think of a downward sloping demand curve. When the price goes down, the quantity goes up, like for most things, right? Lower price, you buy more. That's true for tasks as well. When tasks get cheaper, easier, more productive, you end up doing more of them. And in some cases, if that increase in quantity is big enough, you actually end up spending more than you did before. It may seem counterintuitive, but it happens all the time. I mean, one that we're all familiar with, most of us flew in, jet engines make pilots vastly more productive. Does that mean that we have a lot fewer pilots than we did in 1950? Of course not, because the demand has increased so much more. Now we fly, I've flown on too many trips the past month. So with call centers, it may be that my refrigerator has some kind of a problem. I'm probably not going to call the call center because it's just such a hassle. But if it were really quick and easy and I knew they were going to give me the answer within like 3 minutes, maybe I would. So you could have an increase in quantity that offsets the price. It really all depends on what economists call price elasticity. So I hope that wasn't too wonky for you. Sorry, I'm a professor. But sometimes you have a lower price leading to less spending, but other times, counterintuitively, but more often than not, you have an increase in price actually lead to more spending.
So I want to talk about the flip side of it. And obviously in Davos, we have more bosses than worker bees, but even the CEO suite, that was part of what generated the talk last year, is worried about their jobs. And I think they're still, but I want to talk about more knowledge workers and other things, particularly given the stat you said, which I've heard from others, that this technology, in contrast to others, actually tends to lift the lowest performing workers.
Right.
It makes it easier to be moderately good or midpoint at your job. What does an aspiring worker who wants to benefit from AI, how do you win at this? If you're a worker, if you're an individual contributor or a manager?
Whether you're a worker, you're a manager, you're a policymaker, the answer is abundantly clear. Lean in, be aggressive. This technology, this is not a fad. This is, look, I've been studying technology since I was a PhD student. This is bigger than any of the other ones I've looked at. I think it's going to be more impactful than the internet. And the people who are up front are most likely to learn how to use it and find opportunities. My kids are using it, my colleagues, my students are using it in my class. I did not try to ban, generative AI from my students. It would have been idiotic. And companies need to be the same way. If you can be one of those people figuring out how to make your job, be more productive at your job, which doesn't just mean doing more of the same. More often than not, it means doing higher quality, doing something different that couldn't have been done before. You're going to be on that winning side. I think we have a decade of not just productivity growth, but probably some of the greatest flourishing of creativity. We heard in the previous panels about invention, scientific discovery. So lean into that and be part of the people who are finding ways to create more value.
As we wrap up, a couple last things. One, what aren't people talking enough about? What should businesses be thinking more about when it comes to bringing in generative AI that we're not talking about enough?
Well, I just want to double, triple down on this productivity point because, there's just flashy, cool technology, and it's fun. I like it. I like playing with technology, but there is so much productivity gain that can be had by businesses around the world. And what I'd like to see is a big uptick in productivity. The last quarter productivity in the United States was a little over 5%. I don't know if that's sustainable, but I think ultimately we will start getting, in the short run, but in the medium and long run, I do think we'll start getting numbers like that. And I think too many companies are sort of being a little hesitant. You're not going to get the benefits until you act. Doesn't mean boil the ocean. It means take some of those examples I just gave you or do a task-based analysis to prioritize which ones you want to start with. But get on that flywheel where you're getting the benefits. 2024, like I said at the beginning, is going to be the year where those productivity gains start showing up in specific companies, often double-digit numbers, and at least for the broader economy, at least significant single-digit numbers.
All right, well, we're going to have to leave it there. Eric, thank you so much. I'm eager to continue this conversation. If last year we went from ChatGPT to this year, it's hard to imagine what we'll be talking about next year.
I agree.
Well, thank you all so much. You don't have to go. this is the last part of today's programming, but as Nick and others mentioned, we have tons of great programming throughout the week. I'm going to be interviewing Sam Altman here tomorrow, which should be really fun. And then we have great events throughout the week. Stay, have a coffee, and let us know what you'd like to see in the future.